Hi everybody, welcome to Do You Believe on livesci-fi.tv. Thanks for joining us tonight. And I am your host Noreen, and guess who's in the studio with me tonight? Tim Wood, hello. The one and only.
Hello.
Hey guys, don't forget, please subscribe to us tonight and give us a like. We'd really appreciate it. And before we start the show, Tim, do you want to tell them about your upcoming event?
Yeah, we're doing a live ghost hunt broadcast starting on the 27th at the infamous Sally House in Atchison, Kansas. So it'll be a live 72-hour event. So if you're interested, tune in.
So, yeah, that's a must. Yeah. And then also for next week's show on Thursday, our guest will be Michael Esposito, who is an EVP specialist, but he's more on the scientific level, and how he does EVPs it's really awesome, and he'll explain how he does his, completely different from how everybody else does. So tonight our subject is the planchette and the Ouija board. And this is something, near and dear to Tim's heart, because he loves the Ouija board, and he's also a collector as well. Mm-hmm. And our guest tonight is Robert Murch. And
he goes by Murch.
Yeah, but he goes by Murch, so I'll be calling him Murch tonight. And he's the world's foremost collector, historian, and expert on Ouija and talking boards, and his website is robertmurch.com. And also with us tonight is Brandon Hodge. Brandon is a collector, an author, an entrepreneur, and a researcher, maintaining the world's largest and foremost, finest collection of the planchette, Ouija, and spirit writing devices. And his website is mysteriousplanchette.com. So I want to welcome Murch and Brandon to the show. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And we have a lot of questions for you now, but we'd like to start off. Now, Murch, we are so interested in the Ouija. Can you please tell us the history on the Ouija board?
I don't know if you have enough time. You will have to do a little brief.
How about fast?
Well, you actually might want to start with Brandon, to be honest with you, because his real expertise is in the time that leads up to the invention or kind of proliferation of the talking board. And it kind of sets the stage. So if you don't mind,
oh, sure.
I think it'd probably be good if Brandon goes first.
Okay, Brandon, the floor is yours, honey.
Well, it's become sort of a scholarly cliche that everything starts with the Fox sisters in 1848, but it really is true. The Fox sisters, Kate and Maggie Fox, established communication with these rapping spirits that are in their home in Hydesville, New York, and they're getting these unusual, strange knocking noises, the sort of haunt in their house, if you will, and they begin communicating with them through, talking to them, calling out the alphabet and such, and so we have this diverse period where this basic communication of knocks and raps and alphabet calling begins to evolve. And it's about a 40-year history before we get to the Ouija board, and we have a few hiccups along the way. But we have early precursors with them laying out alphabet cards or using large sort of alphabet tiled trays and pointing to letters as the spirits knocked or the tables rapped out. And eventually this is refined to automatic writing, which becomes popular pretty quickly. But they soon develop a device for that, which is the planchette. And for those who don't know, the planchette is a heart-shaped board with two small casters on it, and the third wheel is a pencil. And with everyone cooperatively using this device in the same manner we're familiar with the Ouija board being used, you're able to produce cooperative spirit communication writing, automatic writing, through this device. And so you have that, you have some sort of false starts. Up on the screen now is a picture of a young gal blindfolded doing a planchette test. And so we have about a 40-year history of this planchette. It's in 1868 in particular. It explodes in America, becomes one of our first national phases, just a huge fad, and immensely popular device. There are other starts and stops with these devices we call dial plates, which also point to letters in a familiar way. But really by the 1880s, the planchette has already sort of waxed and waned with the coming and going of not only the Associated Press spreading these stories, but also wars, such as the Civil War, which leads to its first surge of popularity. And it just gets refined, and its refinement is where Murch comes along after some of the starts and stops toward true alphabet boards.
Hey, Brandon, what made it initially explode? Around 1868. Like, what was there?
Time, not only do you have the Civil War, which has just ended in 1865, so you've got a massive loss of life, but you also have the craze, of course. Spiritualism by this time has caught on full in the country, but you also have the rise of cooperative media, and that's very, very important to this, because now newspapers don't just print a local story. In 1845, 3 years before the Fox sisters show up, the Associated Press comes on the scene. So their story doesn't just stay in upstate New York. It spreads all over the country. And it's the same way with planchettes. By the time they come along, the news is able to latch on to a sensational story, whether it be a mediumship or table tipping or planchettes or later Ouija boards, and spread it all over the country and even cross the Atlantic into Europe and England. So it really is sort of the rise of cooperative media as well as the wars during this time that sort of create that longing. That drives all that.
No, with the planchette, who were the first companies that actually, were there any companies that put initial patents in on the planchette itself?
Planchette patents. There are some major manufacturers. G.W. Cottrell, actually, about 8 years before the craze, begins producing planchettes in Boston, known as the Boston Planchette. And then from there, it sort of lingers. It just hovers there. He makes 50 of these things. They don't go anywhere until there's this 1867 story, first in England and then reprinted and spread virally all over America. And from there, you get companies like Kirby and Company, Nathan Bangs Williams, really the stationers at this point, rather than the game manufacturers. It's mostly the booksellers begin producing these items and spreading them all over.
How did the planchette get its name?
Well, it is French. It has its origins in France with Allan Kardec, the famous spiritist. And they first used a little basket with a pencil, but they soon evolved into a board, and it's French for little plank.
And when this little board came out in the 1800s, it was always called the planchette?
It was. There are many tales of, it was invented by an M planchette and these various tales, but no, it's pretty simple. It was French for little board, and since its origins were in Paris, that name stuck.
And then I noticed how big the planchette was, and then eventually it got smaller and smaller. Is that because of it being linked to the Ouija board?
Well, in 1886, we have another media sensation in an article called The New Planchette. And the New Planchette is really where Bob comes in.
Okay, so should we turn the floor over now to Murch and he can talk about the history of the board?
Absolutely. Murch?
Sure. Thanks, Brandon. So basically, everything Brandon said is spot on. Talking boards or anything in spiritualism tends to have its ups and downs, and it's very cyclical. Ouija boards are very popular in times of war and economic depression. And so right off the Civil War, you have this perfect time for something to take off. And just like the planchette, the talking board doesn't take off the first time. In 1886, there's this article that Brandon mentioned that's called The New Planchette, and it talks about this talking board craze that has taken over a couple of towns in Ohio. And they describe it perfectly. These articles that are reprinted all over the Associated Press have descriptions and little drawings, people playing it, and describe exactly what we think of as the Ouija board. And so, if I step back a little bit, just for people who are listening, we all tend to call all talking boards Ouija boards. But Ouija is actually a trademark. It's a brand that's today owned by Hasbro. The reason why we do this is it's the one that lasted. It was the first that we can prove mass-manufactured board, and it's the one that stuck. So talking boards, general class of these games, Ouija is one of them and the most popular.
So then in the 1800s, what was it called?
It wasn't. So, like, your real question was, how long have talking boards been around? And the truth is, though, you read lots of fantastic, amazing things about how Pythagoras was using them in his time. It's just not true in the sense that we just can't prove it. There's no fact, there's no evidence that shows that talking boards existed in the form that we know them today as the Ouija board before 1886. There were, like, the things that Brandon talked about. 1876, there were someone who invented, they had a little board and they used a little stick to point out the letters. But again, 10 more years until 1886 before you actually have someone merging the planchette with a letter board.
Mm.
So
that's how they got married together then.
Exactly. So the marriages today, most people think of the planchette as just being a piece of the talking board.
Right.
And, what's really unique about Brandon is that he spent all this time researching its own history. So the planchette predates the talking board and then just kind of comes absorbed into part of it. And it takes another 4 years before this article. It's taken a long time to pin this down, and luckily through the wonderful digital age we live in, we've been able to show that this story went all over the world. This 1886 article about the talking board craze was in London, in Australia, in Canada, in France, in Spain, and also it ran in the Baltimore Sun. And two men, Charles Kennard and E.C. Reich, who are in Chestertown, Maryland, probably read this article because they both claim later to have invented the board in 1886, which seems kind of suspicious since that's when this article went all over the world. And in 4 years after that, Charles Kennard would leave Chestertown, Maryland, to go to Baltimore. And when he was there, he met a man named Elijah Bond. And Elijah Bond basically took this idea, refined it, patented it, and they started the first company, the Kennard Novelty Company. And William Fold was one of the first employees and one of the original stockholders. His family and him would make Ouija boards from 1890 to 1966 when they sold it to Parker Brothers. And the reason the Ouija won is a little bit of what Brandon was talking about, which was this was mass manufactured. So the timing was just perfect, whereas there were planchettes that were made by these individual companies who, some of them did other things. The Kennard Novelty Company made other stuff, but they could just make them on a huge level. And in fact, just a couple of years, within 2 years, they had 2, 4, 6, 7 factories, including one in London, all over the United States, just pumping out these Ouija boards. And with a patent and a trademark, it was not impossible, but the other ones just couldn't last.
So when they were selling the Ouija boards in the 1800s, the planchette did not come with it?
It wasn't. It didn't exist. The Ouija board did not. The Ouija was not named Ouija until 1890, April of 1890, and the talking board did not exist until 1886.
I see.
And just to give you an idea of the popularity of this, I'm sure
even though
Bob
people
has the numbers
think,
too,
and we read these stories that people had these earlier.
Brandon, wait a minute. Murch is still talking. Hold on for a second. Go ahead, Murch. Brandon didn't know you were... Brandon didn't know you were still talking.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's basically, again, people believe that it did exist. It's got this myth part of it, mystifying oracles, that it's existed since the beginning of time. Forms of divination or fortune telling have existed. It's kind of where we draw the line in the sand, so that people have been using pendulum devices for a very long time, but that's not what we necessarily consider a talking board. The talking board falls into that family.
Now, the Ouija board has such a stigma attached to it, but there is no stigma attached to the planchette. So
it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, because the planchette now is connected to the Ouija board, but there's the stigma is the Ouija board. How do you feel about the stigma that they have attached to the Ouija board with all this darkness and negativity?
Well, it's tough because as a researcher or historian, I step back a bit from that, and I see that that's what makes it sell today. But if you think about it, and part of the research that a lot of us have done shows that the Ouija board didn't have this stigma for much of its life. So, yes, early on, there were people who were upset with the Ouija board, and the Ouija board was born out of the spiritualist movement, no doubt about it. The difference is the original people who got upset with the Ouija board were the very people who the movement came out of. So, I mean, you think about this. Up until the Ouija board, if you wanted to have a séance, you hired a medium, which was expensive. Not a lot of people had a lot of money, back in 1886, 1890. And all of a sudden, for $1 or $1.50, everyone could sit around the room and do this themselves. So who were the first people upset? Mediums. They wrote about this a lot in the papers and would say, the same argument you hear today, but let's frame it a little differently. They would say, you're dealing with something dangerous, you're opening up doors you don't know how to close. You need someone like me, someone experienced, to guide you through this unseen land. Well, they're not worried about your safety, they're worried about their pocketbook. And so there's a real big schism that happens real early between the spiritualist community. So today, on a lot of different ghost hunting shows, and I see this at a lot of conventions that I speak at, there's still this first thing you see on these shows are, did someone use a Ouija board here? Is that how this started? And the funny thing is early spiritualists who were investigating hauntings or trying to make communication, this was just a stock in their bag of ways that they would experiment. And so what happened is, over time, Hollywood would use the Ouija board in its films as the perfect way to show demonic possession. Because, think about a Ouija board session. It's very tense, and it's very stressful, and it's quiet, and it starts moving, and you can hear the sound of it. It's just a great visual and audio tool. And it really wasn't until The Exorcist, where they had a quick little scene that implies that her using this is what caused her to become possessed. That's what exploded. So if you talk to people in their 80s and 90s, they remember playing the Ouija board, and it was just a game, and it was fun, and everyone played it. But if you ask people today that are younger generations, that's after this has had that major impact. So, 1920, Norman Rockwell paints the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, a man and a woman playing the Ouija board.
I've seen that.
Everyone did it. It's like having an iPhone. Yeah. There was just not, and again, there were stories of bad things happening, but they were the minority. They were not what we believe today. And I think, Brandon can talk about one of the most fun things about researching history is that you have to take off the glasses that you see things today, because what people were doing back then, they just looked at the world so differently.
Well, like 5 years ago or so, that's when that I remember hearing, stay away from the Ouija board. Oh my God, it's really bad. And if you're going to use the Ouija board, you have to say a prayer to Saint Michael to get protection. And that has stayed with me. So I used to be afraid to use the Ouija board because these psychics would say, oh my God, don't ever use the Ouija board. You're going to get nothing but negativity. And so I've always been afraid of it for years. And then they said too, when you close the board, you have to close it properly. So, but now today I'm not afraid of it anymore. I see it in a different way.
Belief is a huge part of the Ouija, and it's a huge part of everything, but what you believe and what you bring to the table, it affects everything we do. And so if you go into using a Ouija board or any type of communication, whether you're using a K2 meter or an EVP session, this is just a tool, and I say this a lot. It sounds kind of maybe too simple, but like right now we're having this great conversation over the phone, and I say things to you, I get you upset, you say bad things to me, we go back and forth, we get off the phone. I don't throw my iPhone out the window and say, I'll never have another one of these in my house again. But with the Ouija board, we do. We personalize the Ouija board. Yeah. We give the Ouija a lot of power that we don't give a K2 meter or an EVP recorder. And it becomes becomes the third thing in the room. But technically, it's a tool that people use to make this communication. So whether you believe you're communicating with your subconscious, or whether you believe you're communicating with something else out there, and maybe not necessarily a psychic connection with the people you're playing it with.
Yeah, that's
just how you're making the communication. And what fascinates me is that the fear that, like you were talking about, that people have over this particular tool over others. And it's what makes it unique, and also it's what makes it sell. I mean, The Exorcist, when it came out, people trampled over each other, passed out in the movie theater, just horrified, and yet they all ran out and bought a Ouija board because they wanted their friend.
And that's what I'm wondering too. Of the I have no psychic powers whatsoever, but the Ouija board, when I use it with certain people, it seems to move. Now, if it was up to me, the thing would not move. But there's a certain person that I use the Ouija board with, and we get a communication. I mean, it's awesome. And I'm just wondering if that's coming from the person, from their their psyche, because I think this other person is psychic.
I think it's interesting. If you go back to the beginning, the early directions, William Fold was a brilliant marketer, and he saw the Ouija board for what it was, which was he marketed it to however it sold. And he saw that, okay, this is a great date game. I mean, think of this. In 1890, this is a man and a woman who are not supposed to be alone in a room together, and, they dim the lights, their knees are touching, their hands are touching on a planchette. This is just perfect. And so you see real quickly it gets integrated into the directions, for two people, a man and a woman preferably, and it's just, it becomes this perfect thing. Now, for everyone else, you hear this all the time. Some people can work it alone. Some people need always someone else, and it works for them. It doesn't matter who. Other people, it's certain people. But, Brandon, if you want to tell them about it's kind of your first experience you really had with the board, and it was a great experience we had at Phenomenology in Gettysburg.
Well, it was, and for all the years of research and collecting, to finally put your hands on a planchette. And in high school, I had a brief experience. I never actually used the board, but I watched some sessions taking place over the course of about 2 weeks with some high school friends of mine. And it got creepy and spooky and scary, and it was finally put away. But at Phenomenology in Gettysburg, I had the opportunity at the Nellie Pierce house to actually, I sit there, I'm watching a session, and there's 4 people on the board. And at one point, a collector friend of mine, hi Janet, is there, and she's using it. Everyone's just got the lightest touch on this planchette. And I finally tapped her on the shoulder after this thing really got going, and I said, Janet, I would really, really love to experience this if I could get in on it. And I did. And went for about an hour on the Ouija, and we established a communication. Now, I don't know what everyone who's listening's beliefs are, and I kind of leave those questions to higher moral authorities, right? But the fact is, we had an experience, and we certainly tapped into something. Whether we're tapping into spirits that haunted the house, whether we tapped into a collective unconscious that we all brought to the board, again, I sort of leave that question open to the listeners. But the fact is, we had an experience with very real cognizant communications with something. And as a researcher, I felt that was very important for all these years of research to finally feel it and know it, and to think, okay, well, now all those accounts that I read that maybe I rolled my eyes at in the past or didn't take too seriously, after you have a serious experience like that and are able to feel the movement and see that no one is, cramming down on this planchette and moving it toward the yes and no and such, then you start to take those accounts more seriously, and you start to see that no matter what those people believed, they did have an experience. They had a very real, very visceral experience, and that was important to me as a researcher to finally have that for myself. because I'll cast a more discerning eye toward those early accounts now.
Have either one of you ever seen the planchette move on its own?
Not me, no.
No, I have not. And, you know, a lot of people claim that they've seen this or have this, and it's not that I don't believe them. It's just I personally haven't seen it myself. And again, if I did, the first question I'd have, you know, you break into this kind of scientific part area. You know, is it telekinesis? Is it something else that's going on? And, you know, again, the spiritualist movement's born out of people wanting to make contact with people who've passed on. And so, you know, what is really happening here? Is this really, you know, for $19.99, are you really making communication with the other side? Or, you know, is this just something else that's going on? And that's the fun of all these things, you know, all of these, the ghost hunts that we go on and do. And it was awesome to, I was really lucky, privileged to be there with Brandon and have that experience with him, because it's so much fun to see someone. I mean, I'm looking at him like I'm sure people looked at me the first time I ever used one, and it moved. And we all took our fingers off to see who was, if there was one person who was channeling this, or, you know, even pushing it subconsciously. And the thing went, no matter who took their hands off. So it was a really cool, and again, an hour. I mean, and I've done this for a long time, and you know, it takes a long time to style things. So you kind of hope you get something that's going to tell you yes or no answers. Well, this had no problem spelling things out, dates. It was just really, really cool, and it was also cool to have some other friends like Terry and Janet there as well. So it was a good time with some good friends.
So in your guys' research, I know people have said, you know, I guess the popular thing right now is the ZoZo phenomena. Have there been any other entities that in the past that known spiritualists or people that they believe that they have contacted to, that you guys have come across in your research?
Well, in early spiritualism, really John King was kind of the whore of spirits, if you will, because he showed up in so many seances, and later Katie King, made famous by the medium Florence Cook as these full-form manifestations of Katie King, never mind that they looked identical in photos. But some of the early entities were the pirate John King and his daughter Katie, as well as a smorgasbord of Victorian celebrities, from Abraham Lincoln to kings and queens of Europe to Benjamin Franklin. So everybody seemed to be making appearances in the early days, as well as prominent passed-on spiritualists. You often have... You've got, for example, Andrew Jackson Davis, one of the earliest, the seer of Poughkeepsie, one of the earliest spiritualists, actually was said to be channeling Swedenborg, whose theories of animal magnetism really contributed to the rise of spiritualism. So every time a spiritualist died, they quickly started making appearances at seances. So there was certainly a large and long guest list for celebrity appearances at seances throughout the era.
What are some of the weirdest variations you guys have seen over the, you know, through your research with the Ouija boards and planchettes that you guys have come across there on your research?
You mean like of the boards or the planchettes themselves, or just weird stories?
I guess of the boards, and then, you know, the planchettes too, because I've seen some pretty quirky ones, but I don't know like which ones stick out for you guys.
Well, I think Brandon just came across a pretty rare one that I'm lucky enough to have. In 1933, William Folt's son, William Anderfold, came up with an electric Ouija board, the electric mystifying oracle, and it would create a circuit as you go over it, and it would flash lights. It had a battery. It was way before its time. Wow. And Brandon, you could tell him how you found it.
Oh my God.
That's funny. I mean, actually, the day before Phenomenology, I've got a ton of work and catching up to do before I catch my plane, and I get a call from here in Texas, and they tell me, well, you know, I was cleaning out a barn, and I found this Ouija board patching a floor in the barn, patching a hole in the barn floor. And, you know, that was quirky enough until they told me, well, it's metal. And at that point, that clued me in that it was probably something pretty spectacular. And so I ended up spending 6 hours on the road that day, even with a trip the next day to get that thing. And that's we recovered I think our 5th or 6th electric mystifying oracle. There's not a lot of them that survive
God.
Great Depressions. So,
is that for sale?
Not at the moment.
But so what you asked before, like weird variations. Gene Orlando from the Museum of Talking Boards, another great website if you want to see some really, really neat rare boards. He always kind of schools us on how spirit communication devices often resemble new devices that we use to communicate to the living. So whether they're dial plates or whether they're Ouija boards, they look like things that we use to talk to different people. So we always make this joke that the first text messages were sent through the Ouija board, and but the truth is it all makes sense that why things look like this. So there's some really strange ones as technology has gotten bigger. I mean technically the obelisk and all the different devices that you see them up, or the Frank's box, they're all, to me, variations of a digital Ouija board. So they're really cool, especially if you look at the Ouija or talking boards was an American invention. You don't often see, I haven't seen a Russian Ouija board, though I bet there one exists. So they're really interesting. And some of the planchette patents that we found, and that Brandon can tell you about, they're just really cool looking, and you can see why they didn't necessarily take off, because they just were too expensive to make, but they're really neat to look at.
Yeah, that's where I really get interested, is the quirky mechanical stuff. I kind of leave the boards for Bob, and I go for all the weird variations, the false starts, if you will. And you have things like the 1853 patent by Adolphus Wagner, and it's the first talking board patent of any sort that we're aware of, and it was patented in London. And he was a German that made this weird device. It's sort of like one of these pantographs, which for those who are familiar is sort of an antique copying device. It's sort of these cross beams, and you have a pencil on one end and a pencil on the other, and you can trace something and it'll draw it out on the other end of the device. But it had these discs on it, and everyone would place these hands on these discs that were all connected by this crazy network of cross beams, and it would ultimately move a pointer over a letterboard. Another thing, for those who were at Phenomenology, I introduced, it was sort of the public debut of a 1920s Wanda tipping table. The Wanda is, at first glance, looks like a Ouija board on sort of a mini table Ouija board. It has a base and 2 legs upright, and the letters and the numbers we're familiar with. But it has a needle, as an immovable needle as the pointer. It's built in. It's not a separate planchette. And it operates by a pulley system. So as you tip the table back and forth in sort of a nod to the earliest forms of spirit communication of table tipping, as you tip the table back and forth, the needle turns and points to the different letters and numbers. So it's just a really quirky, funky little device. I mean, it's easy to see why it didn't. It didn't overtake the Ouija in popularity, but it's neat, and those sorts of things fascinate me.
Were the yes and the no and the goodbye always on was that on the original canards?
Yeah, so what we can see, the original talking board said like good eve and good morn, and goodbye, the earliest Kennard boards that we have say goodbye, and Brandon and I also have copies of the 2 boards that look very similar, that were clearly made by the same person. And the one I got came out of a family in Chestertown. So we know that E.C. Reich and Charles Kennard made a dozen or so of these talking boards that they kind of played with their friends at parties and stuff. And we're really hoping these are 2 of those boards, and those have goodbye on it. So goodbye was one of those easy things that seems to have come in real fast.
Right. What did the symbols mean that they originally put the star and the moon and the going back, hearing the people, using opening prayers, all these things, we kind of dug into these Ouija stations that have all come up. So, but an interesting thing happened. So, it's easy to look into stuff today and say, well, the stars must have made symbols. But
the original boards, if they had good eve on them, of course you'd have a full moon and a crescent moon. It would be nighttime, and of course people believe that that's when the veil is thinnest between this world and the next. So the nighttime scene would look obvious, but a really neat thing happened. I was in Gettysburg, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I was going through the stones, and on the original Bond boards, he would have the crescent moon tipped down with the star. And I noticed that that's on a bunch of graves, and it was a farming thing, a time of like when they would, take all their crops in and stuff. And so it's possible that it means that, but Brenda and I were also in a Masonic temple when we were trying to do some research, and we walked smack into, I'm not even going to pretend I know what exactly I was looking at, but it was a scene that used some of the sun and the moon symbols that we see on the Ouija board.
Well, it was an Oddfellows apron from the Oddfellows Lodge that Charles Kennard was a member of, and it also dated from the time he was a member. They still had the item framed, so it actually had all this iconography on the apron of the moon imagery. And so I have little doubt, we can't conclusively say so, but after seeing that, I have little doubt that it was fraternal secret society symbolism.
Mm-hmm. Right, things that they were used to seeing, they would, put on their product. So, later on, so originally what became the sun was originally a full moon, and it would later become a sun, and then you would see the drawings, and that was just part of what you see change in the Ouija board was a really smart marketing technique by William Full. The patent expired in 1908. So after 1908, legally anyone could make a talking board. So what he would do was he would take the planchette and put a hole in it and put a window in it and patent that. And then he would copyright things and change the design patent so that he was always one step ahead of the competition. And that's basically, he actually sold 2 boards, Ouija and the Mystifying Oracle. And the reason he did that was there was so much competition right off the bat for the Ouija board. Like anything else that sells, once one person makes it and it's popular, everyone wants to cash in. And so he, in his brilliancy, basically saw that if he made another board and put on it makers of the original Ouija board and sold it for 50 cents less, well, people would still buy his product. And so, because it's so expensive to take someone to court, and, he'd still send his letters out, but he basically just put them out of business by people buying the makers of the original Ouija board. It's brilliant.
Now, I understand that there's a board out now called an angel board. Is that put out by them, or is that somebody else?
It's not Hasbro. Actually, Harry, one of the Ouija collectors, and the person who was in the Gettysburg kind of séance that we had, she makes an angel board, one of the early ones, and it's perfect because the Ouija or talking board has survived almost 125 years because it's been able to reflect what people believe is mystical and interesting at the time. So Ouija was originally called the Egyptian luck board because in the 1890s there were all these discoveries in the valleys of the kings, and that to Americans what was seen as mystical. Well, in kind of the 90s to like early 2000s, there was this huge angel movement, and so the spin on this would be that talking to your guardian angel would be a lot safer, and it's also more in fashion. So she came up with an angel board. It's kind of an amazing design. It's beautiful.
Does that infringe on the Ouija patent?
Well, the patent expired in 1908. So as long as you don't call it Ouija and you don't have the exact same artwork, you can have the arcs and the letters and put your own artwork and call it an angel board. You just can't call it a Ouija board.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Suddenly, every listener is looking at their portfolio of investments.
That's pretty funny. Well, Tim, I kind of have a question for you. I don't think we've ever spoken, and yet I know you're a collector. I mean, what's got you collecting, and what are some of your interesting pieces?
I just, I started collecting them about 6 years ago, and I found my very first boards I ever collected was an old fold board. I believe it was like a 1902 board, and I just loved, I'd never seen one like that before, and it just kind of piqued my interest, and I started doing some research into boards, and just started collecting them. And it was kind of funny because the place I bought it at sold it to me for $4.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it was just, and it was just really cool. It was a really cool find, and I didn't at that time. I didn't know, all the history, and I just kind of, the more and more I learned about them and stuff, and the more and more I collected them, and so I have a lot of interesting boards. I guess one of my favorites is I don't have a Kennard, but I have I guess the one right after that, which is probably one of my favorites, and it's in really good condition, and I just love collecting them. I love the history behind it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, for you or for all the listeners, a couple years ago we started the Ouija and Talking Board Collectors Group on Facebook, and it's a huge help to all the collectors when we try to piece together which board came from which date, and it's been a huge resource, and it's also just a lot of fun. So if you're listening and you want to join, if you look it up on Facebook, like Ouija Collectors, it'll pop up. So Tim, I totally expect you to put in for admission there.
Yeah, I just find it really interesting too. How the different pressings. There's some boards that I have where the letters are going off of the board, so they were pressed wrong, or the goodbye is gone, or the no is halfway off. So it's just really interesting to see how some of the mistakes that were made during the pressings to the boards.
Oh yeah, I mean it was fascinating. William Fold, though, made the most Ouija boards we know of, and for the longest time, quality control of some of the early stuff was not his finest, and so there's tons of variations. And right now I'm working on mystifyingoracle.com, which I'm hoping will be that big resource for talking board collectors, where they will see all the different variations that we know of. And then, like, if you see something that's not on there, they say, well, wait a minute, I've got this and it has this. So hopefully with everyone together, we'll be able to put a lot of this stuff together, because there are hundreds and hundreds. Every time we think we found, okay, this is it, we've got all the talking boards that are out there, Brenda and I will laugh, because someone will write in and say, well, I've got this board by this person. I'm like, okay, well, there's another one.
Yeah.
Never ending.
It's either that, or if we don't find that, we'll find a new patent, or we'll find a new ad, and we're like, oh crap! Like we haven't even seen this one in real life.
Wow.
So we have to add it to the list and hunt it down. I mean, we've got dozens that we know exist that we don't have any specimens of.
Well, how many is in your collection, Murch and Brandon? Murch, how many boards are in your collection?
Well, I'm going through them right now, and I'm photographing everything I have for this new website. And I know for sure I have well over 500 different talking boards. And then there are variations and some duplicates of those boards.
No.
I started collecting 20 years ago, and the price of these boards were like $15. And that was like, people thought you were crazy if you're going to spend $15 on an old piece of wood. Today the prices are not like that, so I would not have the collection I had if I started today.
Do you sell those? Do you sell them?
Yeah, I sometimes, more often than not, especially now, I trade, because, again, I didn't put a lot of money into it, so even though they can be said that they're worth a lot more now, I'd rather give someone a board that they're looking for and get something that I don't have. So I try to foster that collector community by getting people interested. And so I've been writing them down. I was just talking to Brandon, telling him about, I have this many extra canards, or this many Ouija Novelty Company, or this many Isaac Folden Brothers. I'm a bit of a Ouija hoarder, I have to admit it. So I do have a lot. Now that I'm actually going through and cataloging them and putting planchettes and boxes together, there'll be some good opportunities for people who have stuff who might want to trade.
And Brandon, how many in your collection?
Not quite such an intimidating number as that. Planchettes are much more rare. Ouija boards at any given time on the open market, there's dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, available for anyone to buy from any level, from the newer stuff to the older stuff. With planchettes, their popularity ended really 1930s, and not even in America. In America, planchettes were really, really out of the picture in the 19-teens. And they lingered a little bit longer in the 1920s and 30s, but by that time, they had just been decimated by their younger siblings in the Ouija boards. So for me, I've got a much more rare collecting, or the collecting window is much smaller, and the items have had more time to be destroyed and thrown away and such. So I have a pretty unprecedented collection numbering a few dozen. I think I'm up to around 3 or 4 dozen planchettes right now.
And do you sell those?
What's that?
Do you sell them?
No. Like Bob, I occasionally trade. I also collect boards. But particularly the sort of funky stuff, what we call the dial plates, which have some of the odder mechanics that I talked about earlier. But I also tend to cut off my Ouija collecting at about 1901. So I've got a much smaller list that I need to fill out to be satisfied.
So do you guys cooperate with each other? Like if you come across an awesome board and Murch comes across a planchette, do you guys exchange?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Bob and I have worked together, not only amongst ourselves, but with many other collectors to do that. We all try to, as much as we can for sort of in a cutthroat collecting world, we try to help one another out as much as we can. There's a touch of honor amongst thieves.
Okay, hey, I have a question. Have you ever thought about doing a traveling show where people all over the country would be able to see these? Because, I mean, a lot of us can't travel back east because it's so expensive, and we would love to see your collection. Have you thought about doing a traveling show?
That'd be great, wouldn't it, Bob?
Yeah, it would be amazing. So we did the first Ouija exhibit in Baltimore. I had worked with the museum, the Baltimore Museum of the Industry, fascinating, really cool museum in Baltimore, one of many that's in Baltimore. But for like 10 years, I tried to get them to do it, and the timing wasn't right. I couldn't get to the right people, and I was really glad because by the time they could do it, we had formed a community of collectors. So there were about 7 of us who all had pieces there, and it got national attention, which it was a dream of mine to do this, but I just didn't know if everyone else was going to find it as fascinating as I did. So it was really nice to see huge turnout. The museum got unprecedented ticket sales. They did really well, which was great for them. And since then, there's been a lot of interest by other people to do either traveling or just to find some different museums around the country. And I've talked to a few, but if any listeners are out there who know of a really cool place to have it, we'd like to hear it because, again, it was a bit, it just hadn't happened before that you can get that many collectors to show their rarest pieces together. A lot of us have really rare things, but when you walked into this exhibit at the BMI, it was mind-boggling to all of us. And every collector looked at this stuff and said, "Oh my God, I wonder if this stuff will ever be in the same room again."
Unlikely. It was very intimidating.
Tim, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think our time is up.
Yeah.
Okay. Our time is up. And I want to thank you so much, Tim and I. It's just a pleasure to have both of you on the show, Murch and Brandon. We so appreciate you coming onto the show and talking about your planchette and your talking boards. And we want to thank you.
For their websites again.
Yes. And Murch, do you want to give them your website again, please?
Yeah, so, if they want to see where I'm speaking or what I'm doing, it's robertmurch.com. If they want to learn more about talking boards, it's williamfold.com. And the website I'm working on is mystifyingoracle.com.
And Brandon, your website, please?
I roll mine all into 2. We've got mysteriousplanchet.com, which also on the homepage has a link to a more updated Mysterious Planchette .blogspot.com, which is sort of some of my ongoing research that will eventually become a book that Bob and I are collaborating.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Planchette.com.
So thank you so much, both of you, for joining the show tonight. It was just a pleasure. Very interesting, and we just loved hearing all about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having us. And Tim, I really, seriously, hit me up because I want to talk to you and see some of the stuff you have.
I will definitely.
Tell him you had boards.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you very much. Good night. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Good night.
Good night.
All right,
Bye.
Good night, Brandon.
Good night, Brandon.
Oh,
That
wow.
was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of
Awesome.
fun.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Hearing, from other people who are
So,
into the Ouija.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know you are. You have
Yeah.
quite a few boards.
Yeah.
And so, guess what? After the show, we're going to do another show, and guess what we're going to do?
Noreen's been doing a Ouija session forever,
We're going to do
so
the
we'll
Ouija
start.
board.
So, yeah, but we'll do that.
Yeah.
And if you guys haven't, please like and subscribe to the show. And next week, check out Noreen was going to be having Michael Esposito.
Oh, yeah. I'm
He's
really...
one of my favorite EVP specialists
Oh,
out there
yeah.
on the field. So he is a good.
Yeah.
I think he's going to give you some EVPs. To
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
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 So that'll be very fascinating too.
Yes.
And check out Robert Murch's site and Brandon Hodges. They're
Oh, you should
there's
see.
a ton of information on there.
Yeah.
And it's really a really good source if that's what you're into. So
Yeah,
even
they're
if you're not,
fascinating.
it's still
Their
fascinating.
website's
Yeah.
fascinating. I was looking at both of them. Very fascinating.
Yeah.
I've never seen so many planchettes. I had no idea.
Yeah,
I
there's
had
just
no
a ton.
idea.
That's what really got me into it, just the variations, especially in the older boards, and even the modern boards. There's people have done weird things, and there's been weird manufacturing kind of screw ups, with the boards. Like the first board that I got, the Goodbye was off the board.
Was it just not on there? They left it
Only
off?
just the top part.
Oh.
Yeah, and so. You
So
could
it was
never,
like
if you were actually using it, people would always get freaked out because they say you can never close the board. So,
well,
with
yeah, and you know what?
so
Who started all that? Who started all that?
John Zaffis. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. Probably an Exorcist movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, years ago when those boards came out, nothing like that was going on.
Yeah.
But because of all the psychics and all these people now, they're the ones that put that stigma against that board.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll be back at 8:00.
Yeah.
We're gonna do some ITC, digital Ouija board, and also old school.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Old
make sure
school
you guys tune in.
Ouija.
Be a great show.
Yeah.
So, hey guys, I just refreshed the page in about 10 minutes, and the new player will be up.
Okay, thanks
All right, thank you,
everybody.
guys.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks to the mods and and don't
thanks.
forget to subscribe and give us a like, and we appreciate that. Thank
right.
you.